And then
How long were you thinking of talking today? I didn't.
90 minutes have we what is our plan.
Okay, because I have a staff meeting at 1. Yeah,
And that is
in a little bit less than 90 minutes. Yeah, yeah.
perfect.
Okay.
All right, but let's get started. Welcome everyone. Welcome to this special evening, a live Q&A with Rick. We had so little time
Yeah.
last conversation, but so many questions. So we feel very honored that you want to do this together with us. And my name is Filippa, and with me is Linda, and we're from the Psychedelic Society here in Sweden, the organization. And we have a bunch of questions. But before that, I thought if there is anyone completely new into this area, I don't know if you need any further introduction, Rick, but you are the founder of MAPS, working on raising awareness and understanding of psychedelic substances. And you are, capital letters, a true pioneer within this field. And as I
Thank you.
said, we are very, very honored for having this conversation tonight. Mm, and before getting into it, so the outline will be we've asked people who signed up for this conversation to send in questions beforehand. We
Mhm.
have got a lot, as I said, so we'll ask them to begin with. But then we will also let you people at home, if you want to ask a questions directly to Rick here with your microphone, you raise your hand and then we will activate that and you'll get to ask the question. There will be no video or no video of you, but just a microphone. So yeah, the questions will be picked randomly and we'll see how where this goes, but let's have fun.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say that the harder the questions, the better. So anything is up for discussion. I look forward to it very much.
Yeah, sounds
Great.
good. But look, just a quick question before going. How are you? How are you doing?
Well, pretty good. I'm very excited about well, I just came back from a bunch of fundraising events in New York. So I arrived home around 1 in the morning last night. But what I'm really excited about is I'm leaving on Sunday for Ukraine. So
Mm,
we're training Ukrainian therapists, and we've had over 200 applications from Ukrainian psychiatrists and therapists for only 55 spots. So we're very excited to do this. It'll be in the western part, the more safe part of Ukraine. And just to start out, we're going to do another training in Poland
yeah.
in probably in October. Um, but even more kind of amazing to me is just that I'm going to Beirut in May, and
Yeah.
I've been invited to speak there. And so the idea is trying to bring MDMA therapy to Lebanon. And
Okay.
I'm finding all sorts of connections. Once you start doing stuff, it's amazing how much you know support you get. So
Yeah.
there's even underground psychedelic therapists in Lebanon. There's above ground therapists that leave Lebanon to work with people elsewhere. So the idea is that maybe there's enough social support for us to get permission. Plus, we already have funding
Mm.
from some Lebanese who've left the country a long time ago, came to America and were successful, and now want to fund it. So this is all part of the global projects that we're trying to implement around the world. It's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to be talking to all of you as well. So I'm doing pretty well. I'm a night owl, so I slept late this morning. It's really good. I'm ready, raring to go.
Happy to hear that.
Yeah.
All right. So let's dig into it. And the first question kind of is the continuation of what you were just talking about. Because last time you spoke about a project with MDMA assisted therapy to help Syrian refugees in Denmark.
Yes.
Do you have any news about that?
Unfortunately, no. I mean, the situation is that we need the funding for the study. So I had met with a philanthropist who I thought might be very supportive of all this work.
Mm.
But it turned out that, to my surprise, really, what he wants to do is to wait until FDA approval and then start supporting all this work around the world. But my approach was to say that these are people that need healing now. They're suffering from trauma now. And things don't start out in a major big way. They always start out small anyway. And then you build on that. So I was somewhat disappointed that I didn't raise the funds for that project yet. So I think that's the main limitation. They were also looking for a principal investigator from the University of Copenhagen. So
Mm.
I think that if the funds were there, they would find somebody ready to do the research. But unfortunately, it's not moving forward. The need is there. The need is great all over the world, and the pharma company that is going to be working to try to get approval from FDA is more looking at places that they could be like a traditional pharma company and have a market for MDMA. So that MAPS, the nonprofit, is looking to where there's what we're calling sort of high trauma, low resource areas, or areas where it's more about humanitarian purposes. So that's the project in Denmark. And so I don't see the pharma company paying for it, and it has to come from philanthropy. Uh,
Mm.
and so we're going to continue to try. I was just 3 days in New York for fundraising meetings. And I think what a lot of people are really excited about, the work in Ukraine, the work elsewhere in Lebanon, the work around the world where people are really in dire need more so than at least what they're able to get in terms of the treatments that their government is offering them now. So
Mm.
I guess I share that with a sense of disappointment that we have not been able to raise the charitable funds for that. I had hoped that the pharma company, as part of being a public benefit pharma company, would see this as part of their obligation or their opportunity. But that's been a challenge. Once we've taken on investors, even though they're more public benefit minded investors, they're still not ready to just put money towards these humanitarian projects. So if any of you happen to know anybody that wants to donate for that project, the other thing that's of interest is to say that with the revolution or the military change in Syria,
Mm.
there may be more willingness on the part of Syrians to move back to Syria and see if they can create a new, more open country.
Yeah.
Um, so that's one hope. But still, I'm sure that there's a lot of Syrian refugees that don't want to return, that are traumatized, and that really need help. Uh, and so, yeah, we'll continue to try to do the fundraising. And
Mm.
once we get that, that project can then move forward.
I feel like that's a never-ending job, right? Continuing to fund like fundraising, continuing with that, and so on.
Well, it raises an important point, which
Yeah.
is as sort of a leader, in a way, it's my job to be perpetually unsatisfied, meaning it is a never-ending job. So it should always be that I'm wanting more
Yeah.
and I'm wanting to do more. So that's what I've said to a lot of the people at MAPS, that my job is to create more work.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
thank you.
All
Oh,
right.
so the next question then, there will be a little bit like moving from different
Yeah.
topics. But the next question is, do MDMA or psilocybin medicines carry specific risk with older 65 plus patients? As an example, these patients are known to be vulnerable to side effects from anesthetic medication, which can bring about delirium or cognitive dysfunction, such as memory loss. Long question.
Yeah, there's no such thing as memory loss from MDMA or psilocybin or LSD or anything like that.
Mm.
There is from electroconvulsive therapy, from ECT, that people get for depression. There's some serious memory loss issues there. There's actually memory gain. That's the whole point of these drugs, is that you take them and things that have been very frightening or suppressed, different traumas that people have put out of their minds, or issues that they don't feel ready to really address, it now comes to the surface. So when we think about it as like a membrane between the conscious and the unconscious mind, and that at the dreams at night, there's more information sort of flowing up from the unconscious. That's what happens with psychedelics. And that's why you need the safe supportive setting, because you never know what's going to come up. But you actually gain memory. In fact, we've had a bunch of the people, for example, I'll just say one of the firefighters that was in our study, where this was in Charleston, South Carolina, and the roof collapsed and killed a bunch of the firefighters. And so the ones that were survivors had significant trauma, and had seen, their close associates die. Um, And so one of the firefighters under the MDMA said that he thought he had remembered what had happened during this fire. But under the influence of MDMA, he realized that he had blanked out a whole sections of some of the worst stuff, that it was just gone from his conscious memory because it was too painful. All right. So the
Yeah.
other thing to say in answer to this question is that we have a lower age limit. The FDA is only currently permitting us to work with people that are 18 years or older. Once that FDA gives approval for MDMA assisted therapy for 18 or over, then we're required to do studies with adolescents under 18. But right now we have no upper age limit. So it depends on health. So I would say that the risks for MDMA are more in the relationship of increased blood pressure. There's a little bit more increased blood pressure with MDMA than there is with psilocybin. Psilocybin can also increase blood pressure, particularly when you get into difficult emotions, your blood pressure can go up as well. So we're concerned not just about people older 65, but anybody that has compromised heart that might have struggles, like if they can't climb a bunch of stairs or if they can't climb, um, do physical exercise for a period of time. That's a concern. However, there are beta blockers that people have been given with MDMA that can sort of reduce the impact of blood pressure and your sort of physiological reaction to things, and at the same time don't seem to impact the psychological aspects of MDMA. As people get older, they get more other kind of illnesses. Um, so there's a concern about, are there other illnesses or what other medications people on? So there can be drug-drug interactions that are of concern, particularly as people get older. Um, I think that the real risks are not so much physiological, but they're psychological. Um, this idea that difficult material comes up, and if you're not in a trusting relationship with the therapist or with whoever you do it with, not to say you always need to do it with a therapist, you could do it with friends, as long as you feel safe. Peer support is a big thing that we train people for. I don't think it needs to be only under direct supervision of therapists. It should be legally available for people to do on their own, and certainly it's illegally available for people to do on their own. Um, and I think this question, as you get older, one of the things that's really remarkable is that people's brains can still change. You can still process. So we've had people in our studies just a few years ago that had PTSD from Vietnam, and it had never really resolved. And under the influence of MDMA assisted therapy, even people in their 70s and 80s can get through their traumas. So I think that's a particular hope for people who are older. The other thing about people who are older is when you start talking about people who are with cancer or who are facing life-threatening illnesses. And so I've had sort of the very difficult but wonderful experiences of working with multiple people with MDMA days before they died. And it's kind of, you work with their family. It's amazing because when people are on pain meds, so this is also the case for a lot of people that are older, that they can be on pain medications for cancer, for other things. And what we've learned is that MDMA, when you give it to people who are on opiate pain meds or fentanyl, often that makes people really sleepy. It is a depressant, and depending on how much pain they're in, they have to develop a tolerance. They keep taking more of these um, pain medications, and then they're kind of just like sleeping through the days while they sort of are deteriorating and waiting to die. They're not always that present. But when you give MDMA or you give psilocybin, it seems like it synergizes with the opiates so that the pain control is even better.
Mhm.
And the stimulant aspects of MDMA or psilocybin wake people up. And then in particular, I've done this with MDMA, then they're more open-hearted. And it's been like a miracle for people to come from this almost comatose state of being heavily medicated while they're dying to then being more pain-free, being more open-hearted and alert and able to say goodbye to their loved ones. And it's sort of like I've seen people sort of go over their whole history and just talk about these romantic moments and different things as a way to sort of their final goodbyes.
Wow.
Now, when we've done that, these are people that have been in hospice. And so we felt that we would not really take them off of any of the other medications that they were on, just put the MDMA or the psilocybin on top of it. And so it's looking more and more like you don't need to withdraw people from SSRIs. You just need higher doses of MDMA. More and more of the psilocybin is being administered to people on SSRIs, not requiring them to taper. One of the advantages of ketamine is you don't need to take people off their medications. You can just give them ketamine. So I think actually that psychedelics have a tremendous role to play in the elderly. And I certainly think that, my mother-in-law is now 93 years old. She's got memory problems. She's in assisted living. She has a hard time moving around. And so I think as your body becomes more and more constrained and you're less able to move around in the world, what would be really good is if you could move around in your mind. So
Yeah.
I think psychedelics, at least for me, I would love to spend a lot of my elderly years tripping, and thinking about what's meaningful in my life, thinking about death, thinking about what you're leave behind, thinking about messages to your loved ones, things like that. So I think that what we see in America actually is that the fastest growing use of cannabis is in the elderly, and it's often for pain, for depression, different kind of things like that. So I think every case needs to be looked at individually. Um, but I think there's not only is there no, sometimes people get older, they do react with lower doses. They don't need as much the doses. So that's something to be concerned about, is just to try to find the right dose. And for that, you could just start with half doses, see how people react. Um, it also depends a lot on their history of, have they had psychedelic experiences before? Have they smoked marijuana? What is their comfort level with sort of non-ordinary states of consciousness, of losing control, losing sense of who they are and their normal way? That's more the case for psilocybin than MDMA. Um, the other part is, I'll put now back more on the younger people, is that what we've seen is that there are epigenetic mechanisms by which trauma is transferred from parents to children, either from the mother or the father. And these are like methylation, different things about what turns the genes on and off. And so there's Rachel Yehuda is doing work at the Bronx VA at Mount Sinai. And what she's got preliminary evidence to show is that if you are successfully treated with MDMA, but it could be anything, it could be just even therapy, these epigenetic markers can be changed so that you don't need to be passing on multi-generational trauma in that way. So that's not relevant to older people who are now past childbearing, but for younger people, I think it's something important to think about, which is if you do your own work and you can work through, issues that you've got, then you'll have a more psychologically, mentally healthy genetics. Not the genes, not the DNAs are not really changed, but the epigenetics, what turns on the genes.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of opportunities for the lifespan, but I particularly have told my wife and stuff that if I get less and less mobility, just give me more and more psychedelics.
But it's very interesting with the how you can like affect the like if you could resolve generational trauma. Uh,
Yeah,
like wow.
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
yeah. I think that's
That's a huge thing.
a remarkable finding. Well, even it's relatively new, the finding that you pass on generational trauma and how that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've seen trauma go on for multiple generations, hundreds of years, thousands of years sometimes, that
Yeah.
you carry. But yeah, there's lots of opportunities here.
Yeah.
Great to hear.
And that kind of touches upon net zero trauma
Trauma, yes.
by
20,
2070,
yeah,
right?
yes.
They kind of go
Uh,
hand in hand somehow.
yeah, this idea there is that we need a animating vision that is multi-generational. And we also, it helps to think about humanity as a whole. So that's one of the main things that the internet brings us, that the modern technology brings us, that is that we're becoming closer and closer together. That we the Pandemic was a good reminder of how we're all interconnected. And so when we think about net zero trauma by 2070, there tends to be well, there's been $4 billion plus in the last 4 years invested in psychedelic pharma companies, but they tend to think about where they can make money. So it's where's the suffering and where's the money? The idea of net zero trauma by 2070 is where's the suffering, and even if there's no money, that's what we need to think about. So um, if I were to say no trauma, so we have to clarify that net zero trauma does not mean no trauma. It just means that there are um, traumas that we experience during our lives, and then these sort of set points for anxiety and depression that can be coming to us through epigenetics. And it's interesting that we started in a way by talking about the Syrian refugees. There's an estimate of by 2050, potentially over 1 billion climate refugees. That's going to completely destabilize societies. And we see what's happening in America was what we hope is what's happening in America is the last gasp of this old selfishness, of this old, it's all about me, sympathy with tyrants and all that there's, and we're backing away from climate change mitigation, and Trump is all big on coal and oil and, going after wind and solar and just self-destructive completely. And so that's making things worse. And this is a critical time for trying to really, reduce carbon, methane, things like that. So I think that if we think again of humanity as a whole, or more or less 8 billion people, something like that, that there's going to be more and more stress over time. So I also needed a time frame that's far enough into the future that people don't say, "Oh, that's ridiculous. That'll never happen. That's, you're just stoned all the time and you don't know, you're not rational anymore." But it's like a vision. So net zero trauma is just like an animating vision to make it so the burden of trauma doesn't increase. Then we can start talking about net negative trauma. If we can actually try to have a more harmonious world where we have overcome a lot of these multi-generational traumas and the ways in which our technology is developing to the point it's already there, where there could be enough food for everybody in the world, there could be enough shelter, there could be more equitable distribution of resources instead of a few people having, $300 billion and most people, having nothing or very little. So the advantage of net zero trauma by 2070 as a concept is it's global. And as I said, many of these psychedelic pharma companies are thinking FDA or Europe, but they're not really thinking global. Then this 2070, it's this concept too that, if your vision is something you can accomplish in your own lifetime, then it's too small. So you need this larger vision, and then you think about the next generations that are going to do stuff. So, we don't want to fix all the problems ourselves.
We need to leave some to them.
Yeah, we have to need some of you guys to work on, not that we're doing such a great job of fixing the problems.
Creating work
but I'll say that the way to realistically do this, so what I felt has been part of the strength of MAPS is that these idealistic visions, but these practical approaches combined. So you need these incredibly hopeful, idealistic visions, but you have to really work on it step by step. So, Bhutan, and I've been getting to know more people from Bhutan recently, did the gross national happiness measure. And it just came out recently that Finland is number one in happiness. And it has been for many, many years. Other Nordic countries are pretty close. I think you have much more of a social safety net. It's more cohesive. The recognition that we're in it together is bigger there than in America, where it's more individualistic and it's more extremes in terms of wealth and things like that. So this this sort of gross national happiness is an actual measure. It's applied to different countries, and in some ways it's more relevant than gross domestic product, than the economic activity. What's the economic activity? What's it for? It's not just for more and more economic activity. It's supposed to make people's lives better. So gross national happiness, I think, is a real advance, and it's gotten Bhutan an enormous amount of attention. But we need gross national trauma as a measure. And so at Psychedelic Science 2025, which is coming up June 16th to the 20th, I know there's a lot of people that don't want to come to America. And we're seeing Canadians are boycotting America. I just was in England. A lot of people in England are not coming to America. There's all sorts of horrible things happening to people at the border for their social media criticizing. It's really absurd. So, but I do want to mention that we're going to have a talk from a woman from Thailand about gross national trauma and how we start developing that measure. And it will actually cost a couple $1 million to develop that measure, to really do it in a way that's realistic. And so I think when I say net zero trauma by 2070, what I'd like to also do is to talk and develop a measure to see, are we actually making progress? Is there some way to do that? And so I think it's a hard problem to figure out what data is available. All sorts of data is being lost now in America in terms of government websites. But what kind of data is available? How do we assess if we're making any progress? There is a measure called the ACEs, which adverse childhood experiences, and there's all these just different domains of childhood experiences that can be adverse, and the more you have, the more likely you are to have trauma later on or develop PTSD. But there's a lot of things that happen not just in childhood, so that's not a good enough measure to use for how do you evaluate gross national trauma, but it's an easier one because you can measure like the number of more or less the number of people whose parents die or the number of people whose parents are divorced, or the amount of sexual abuse. I mean, that's really difficult to measure, but you can get different, or violent crimes or poverty, or all these different ways that adverse childhood experiences are measured. And it could be that we take those but then try to scale them up to not just from childhood. So I think that's a key part of having this idealistic kind of, yes, let's have this goal of humanity as a whole and reduce the burden of trauma, but there has to be real metrics by which we evaluate whether we're making progress.
Yeah.
So that's this idea. And I think some people have confused it and said, oh, that's so ridiculous because they've confused net zero trauma with this idea that there's no trauma. So it's not that. There will always be trauma. There will always be illness. There'll always be death. There'll always be accidents. There's always going to be heartbreaking things happen. And humanity has been murderous for thousands of years, and we haven't really in any way kind of worked our way out of that. So net zero trauma doesn't mean no trauma, just to explain. And trauma, like death, in some ways, it's important. You have to wrestle with death, that you don't want to make your life so protective that you never take any risks. You spend your whole life in bed, that's a risk too. So that there's this idea that you grow from trauma. There's even a measure called post-traumatic growth inventory. So it was used in our phase 2 studies. We didn't use it in our phase 3 because it wasn't an outcome that FDA was looking for. FDA is looking for how do you fix something that's wrong, not how do you grow from trauma. But the post-traumatic growth inventory is a really interesting measure because, let's say somebody is, in a car accident or something and they almost die, but they don't. A lot of times that means that they've been traumatized, but then they think life is more fragile than I realized. What do I really want to do with my time? Am I doing what I really want to do? What do I want to do with my work? What do I want to do with my relationships? So reevaluating your life and your purpose and your mission and your sense of meaning after trauma is what post-traumatic growth inventory is looking for. So it's a measure of if you are successfully treated or successfully able to overcome this adversity, even on your own, without MDMA, without therapy, whatever, even if you're able to be traumatized and recover, then it causes these questions of meaning and purpose, and people can actually grow from it.
Mm.
I'll just say that I had I wouldn't say I was super lucky just personally in my life is I didn't have direct traumas to me, but I was told about indirect traumas like the Holocaust and all. So I had what I would say is meaning and purpose from learning about the traumas that didn't happen to me, but that happened sort of, you could say, multi-generational. And that because I was nurtured in such a way with such a good family, that I was able to um, acknowledge these traumas, not put them out of my mind as if they don't really happen, but also able to be motivated by them and to keep working. So that's what's kept me working this whole time is the awareness of trauma, of cruelty, of war, of genocide, of all of that, but to be call to action rather than a call to just be depressed or anything like that.
Passiveness or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
All
Good.
right.
Thank you for clarifying all that and for sharing.
yeah, yeah. Thanks for asking that question because I think that's really a wonderful kind of a thought. Is can we um, develop a world that has less causes of trauma?
Mm.
And a lot of it is human cost. I mean, again, like earthquakes and things like that. There's always going to be things that aren't. But if we can really start thinking globally, and that would lead to a much better world.
Yeah. There's this quote like hurt people hurt people.
Yes. Yeah. And actually, you remind me of something else. There was a when we were training some therapists. When we first started in Israel, we were working at a major mental hospital, and it was traditional psychiatrists, and they just gave medications to people. They didn't really do therapy, but this was the only place in Israel that was willing. This is 20 years ago. The only place that was willing to start the research. And one of the psychiatrists said something that made me really understand that our training wasn't comprehensive enough. Because what she said is, "Oh, I finally get it. MDMA therapy, it's for victims, but not for perpetrators."
Mm.
And I'm like, no, that's totally wrong. It's for the perpetrators as well as the victims, and that we need to work with the perpetrators. And sometimes it's harder to forgive yourself than it is to forgive other people. And hurt people hurt people. If you don't work with the perpetrators, you're just letting these cycles continue. So I think this idea that we need to work with people in prisons. We need to work with people who have done horrible things. And to say this even clearer, we all have evil within us. Um, it's not like we're all good or we're all bad. Let me just see. There's something on this theme that I want to mention, and it's a quote by Jung, and I think it's just tremendously influential in my thinking about this idea of we're all potentially perpetrators. We're all potentially victims. We have it all within us. We all have courage. We all have cowardice. Um, and so it is especially important. So let me just see. I don't know if I can share my screen, but I'll just try for a second here if I can. I have this. Let's just. Sharing is not turned on. Okay, I'll just
Try
read.
now. Try now.
Oh, good, you did it. Okay, let me just share this. This is just incredibly inspiring, but also frightening. So this is by Carl Jung. This is in 1959. This is several years before he died. This was in a TV interview. It was really, really interesting. But what he said is we need more psychology. We need more understanding of human nature because the only real danger that exists is man himself. He is the great danger. And we are pitifully unaware of it. We know nothing of man, far too little. His psyche should be studied because we are the origin of all coming evil.
True
This
that.
is just really
Really
frightening.
powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So natural disaster is not evil. You can have trauma from an earthquake or from a volcano or floods or whatever, but we are the origin of all coming evil. So yeah, we need to do the work on all of us, the perpetrators within all of us, the selfishness. We all have things to different degrees, and it's what we manifest. It's what we choose to put into the world. So we all have evil thoughts, but what we do with them is what's really important.
Yeah, let's take that with us. And then go into next question. So we'll have one question from the participants in a while, but then before that, one question here. With the increasing number of states and countries considering decriminalizing or legalizing psychedelics, what do you see as the next steps for ensuring that this movement is approached responsibly and effectively?
Well, the single most important thing is how you educate young people.
Mm.
And we have a system to miseducate young people about psychedelics and drugs.
And what is miseducating, do you think?
Well, here, let me. I just, as I said, I just gave a talk. I was in England last week and just gave a talk there. And what I said is in the 60s, when I was growing up in the early 70s, we were told that if you take LSD 6 or 7 times, you are certifiably insane.
Mm.
That's all it takes. I mean, each little bit of LSD drives you further and further crazy, and you do it 6 or 7 times, and you're certifiably insane. So that's outrageous. But when I talk to some of these people in England, that's what they're still taught in schools. People sometimes are still taught that MDMA causes holes in your brain, or that LSD hurts your chromosomes, or that all these drugs are hallucinations and there's nothing of value there, or that if you start using marijuana, before you know it, you're going to be a heroin addict. So young people are miseducated. Now, it's a little bit, what's the alcohol drinking age?
18.
18.
Yeah,
That,
in Sweden.
okay.
In Sweden.
In Sweden? Okay, yeah. In America, it's 21. It's ridiculous. And so you cannot even educate about responsible use in high schools. In fact, when our kids were in high school, we had this, they brought in the parents and they said that if you provide a safe place for your child and their friends to drink alcohol, let's say you let them do that at your home, and one of them goes out and eventually, gets in a car and has a crash or something, you could go to jail.
Mm.
Or if they have even if nothing bad happens, if anybody complains, you are going to be punished for even providing a safe space for kids who do drink. And they all do. And not all of them. I don't drink alcohol, but a lot of kids do. But when you don't provide safe space, then they go do it in the woods. And then they don't want to be caught with alcohol. So they drink it as much as they can, as fast as they can. And they use harder and harder drugs. My son went to McGill in Canada, and they have a 21-year-old drinking age. And
Mm.
he was just shocked at how sensible it was. So we have the DARE program that still tells people that marijuana causes lung cancer. All right, so how do you responsibly decriminalize and move into a different kind of social relationship with psychedelics, with cannabis, with cocaine, with heroin, with all of these different things? You need honest drug education. That's number one.
Mm.
And we do not have that. Secondly, what you need is um, the kind of education, this is the sort of the cutting edge, you could say, of drug education in America that's better than this just scare tactics, abstinence only. There's one that was developed by the Drug Policy Alliance, and it's called Safety First. But their fundamental perspective is, we wish you weren't going to use drugs, and but if you're going to, then here's a way to stay safe. So if you look, I went to a Navajo reservation, went to a Native American church peyote ceremony. A Navajo man brought his 9-year-old son to eat peyote with us. The cultures that have successfully integrated psychedelics, the ayahuasca cultures, the peyote, the mushrooms in many places in Mexico and elsewhere, they don't have age limits. So I think this message, oh, we wish that you would never do drugs, but if you're gonna, here's how to stay safe. It's it's a step in the right direction, but it's still wrong. So it's like, why would we wish you not to do something that might be educational, that might be valuable? We don't want you to do it in irresponsible ways. It's good if it's supervised by family, by the culture, by in religious context. But overall, I think that we need this education that says, here's the potential risks, here's the potential benefits, here's what other cultures have done. You make up your own mind. All right, then what we need is training and peer support. So a lot of people are not going to have access to therapists, or they don't have a diagnosis. But so we need to train people to help each other, to sit for their friends, to learn how to really grow from psychedelic experiences, and to recognize when difficult stuff comes up that the about the worst thing you can do is suppress it. You need, but then for that can be very difficult. So this is just an example of the value of peer support. This is now almost 20 years ago. So within 1 week, we had two women contact MAPS, and they both had a similar story. They had taken ecstasy at a rave, and both had remembered prior sexual abuse. And one of them said that she was with a bunch of friends. They were just out for a party, and this difficult stuff came up, and she thought that they wouldn't want to hear about it, that they just were out to have fun. And so she suppressed her emotions. And months later, she was worse off. And so she contacted us to say, MDMA has made me worse because, I had this stuff come up and I wasn't able to deal with it. And now it's continually kind of bothering me. And so the other woman had a different story. She was with a girlfriend at this rave. That she remembered sexual abuse. She went off into the corner with her friend, and they spent an hour or so talking about it and processing it. She worked her way through it a lot, and then she went back and had a dance the rest of the night. So it's this idea of peer support, and she thought that she had discovered that MDMA could be good for PTSD. And so she did a Google search. Can MDMA help people with PTSD? And she realized that MAPS was researching MDMA for PTSD. And so this is this kind of idea of how peer support can make an enormous difference. And that's what we really need in decriminalized world. We do this at Burning Man, where we have hundreds of volunteers help people with difficult trips at cultures that are more open to psychedelics. Um, there's festivals in Portugal. Boom Festival has tremendous peer support, trained therapists and others, and drug checking. So then what do we need also for decriminalized? Now, keep in mind that there's a distinction between legalization and decriminalization.
Yeah.
What decriminalization means is that you don't go to jail, but often you get a fine, but there's no legal markets. And what that often means is the drugs are not pure, and they're often contaminated. There have been stories of people dying from fentanyl contaminated ecstasy pills. So in a decriminalized world, you don't have quality control over the products that people are getting. They're getting from underground criminal markets. You're not going to go to jail, but it's decriminalized. So that's not really a good, it's a halfway step, but we really need legalization. So on the way to decrim or legalization, we need what's called drug checking. So there needs to be legal ways for people to get their substances evaluated without them getting into problems with the law. So one of the ways that Boom is like the world leader of psychedelic harm reduction is they have thin layer chromatography, a group called Energy Control and others, that at the festival, you bring your drug, they'll test it, and then they'll tell you what's in it. And not only that, but they publicize it to the entire um, community there. They posted, this is supposedly this, but it's actually that. So you really need this idea of drug checking, so that that's another aspect of safety. One of the hilarious things for me was at Boom, is to show how little people know. Um, for a while, there was this idea that mescaline is really exciting. So there was these people that were selling mescaline. They were selling it on blotter, tabs of blotter paper, but they were saying it's mescaline, and people were super excited to be buying mescaline. Mescaline is one of the weakest psychedelics. You need 400 or so milligrams of mescaline to really be like a major trip. And there's no way you can fit anything like that on this piece of paper. It was just obvious. And so some of the people had it checked, and of course it was just LSD. It had no mescaline in it. It was just LSD, and they were just selling it as mescaline. But people didn't understand that mescaline is not that strong, and it doesn't come on blotter paper. All right, so you need drug checking. Then the other thing, and this is maybe one of the final steps about what you need to do this responsibly, is you need treatment on demand for people who are going to get dependent or have problems with these drugs. Because when you have a decriminalized situation, or better, a legalized situation, um, people are not taking it under supervision. They might take it with alcohol. They might do all these riskier things, and people are going to have problems.
Mm.
You know, ketamine is the most addictive of all the psychedelics. And there's more and more people that are getting really dependent on ketamine.
Mm.
So when you stigmatize that, they don't want to go for help. They're reluctant to ask for help. So and then it costs all this money. So you need treatment on demand. Ideally, for people that have difficult experiences that they don't know how to process, or their peer support is not enough, where can they go? Like to an emergency room or something. If we have psychedelically informed emergency rooms where people can, so that you don't have to really tranquilize people or do all this. So I think the final element there is treatment on demand. So, but I will say as a final step that prohibition is so counterproductive that we should move to decriminalization, even without all the things that I said really make it work better. That if we could just turn a switch right now and end prohibition, it would be better, way better, even though there will be a lot more problems. But the drug war itself causes way more problems than the drugs themselves.
I think there are some really, really, really good, important points that you share with this. We've taken a lot of notes, so
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, let me ask you a question. Like, how likely is Sweden to move in this direction?
not so likely, I would say. Some people
Yes.
say 10 years from now,
Wow.
but yeah, of course, everything can happen, but not so likely.
Yeah. So what kind of drug education is provided to people in schools?
It's also, we have this, I don't know how to say it in English, nolltolerans,
Zero tolerance.
zero tolerance.
Oh,
So we're
yeah.
working with that.
Oh my God.
And we have a very um, conservative view on drugs here in Sweden.
Hmm.
Um, and the, how to say, utredning. I really get to test my English here.
Yeah, me too. No, I can't.
Maybe someone in the chat can help us. What is utredning in English?
Investigation.
Yeah, like
Kinda.
investigation. Like, so
Ah,
yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. So the politics doesn't even want to do an investigation of like, how is this policy helpful or
ah,
not? So
I
that is
see.
what we're working with. But I think, of course, if it comes to like the studies and the research on the clinical side, if the results and if the studies become more here in Sweden, like more studies is being done, then maybe that can have an effect,
I
of
think
course,
that will have an
depending on the
effect.
results, of course. But
Yeah, yeah. Because what we've found with medical marijuana and marijuana legalization, and I think also with psychedelics, is that the medical research goes first. That changes some people's minds, and then you get the policy reform.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
But
it.
what is it like sex education? Is it abstinence only? Is it the same as for drugs, like zero tolerance, or how is it? Is it more open-minded?
I would say like the sex education I had when I was in school, it was very limited, very
Oh,
limited. How about you?
Well, I had a mother that worked with it, so I think I don't have the normal view of it, but it's definitely more open and more talked about than drugs,
mm,
and talked in a more like a broader way than drugs, because drugs is just zero tolerance,
yeah,
while sex education is at least a little bit more nuanced.
nuance.
Yeah,
Ah,
even though
great
it's
word.
still lacking, I think.
Ah,
Yeah, but I also see that at least the public is getting more curious, getting,
oh,
and
good.
people are using more I think, yeah, I do see a change, and also the last years there's been a big change, a rapid change, but there's still yeah, it's still mostly not accepted.
Mm.
Yeah.
So when that situation is the case, what we found is that what you need is people speaking out.
Mm.
So, so that was the coming out. That was gay rights and gay marriage, is that people would speak out and then you'd see, oh, this is a wholesome person, but they're gay. Well, I never knew that, and they must be okay. That kind of thing. So I think, yeah, to the extent that people can speak out about what they've learned from psychedelics, that's also a big way to change the culture. But that's where the research comes in. Because then if they can say, oh, I did this in a legal context, there's no criminality involved, then people are more willing to hear it.
Yeah.
So yeah, to the extent that research
Interesting.
can start, that would be really big.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to move on to having Liam asking a question. So I'll turn on your microphone, Liam, and you are welcome to ask your question.
Hey everyone, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Hi Rick, thanks so much for doing this. Just to quickly introduce myself, I'm graduating from college and I've built my resume with the goal of contributing to the psychedelics movement.
Great.
So as an economics student, for me, this has looked like gaining experience on the business side of the industry, working at places like the Collaborative for the Economics of Psychedelics, a psychedelic startup called Enthea, and now I'm working at KCSA, where I'm doing comms work for MAPS, actually.
Wow, thank you for that. Wow.
Yeah.
Great.
So I'm currently focused on organizing PS 2025. So I'll see you there.
Yeah. Do you
Um,
live in Sweden, or where do you live?
I'm in DC right now, where I go to school.
Okay.
So I'm not Swedish, but anyways, here's my question for you. It took me a long time to find internship opportunities in this field, even though this has been a passion of mine for years now. And before I succeeded, I almost gave up trying to contribute to this field professionally. So my question is, in your mind, what is the best way for someone like me to contribute to the movement if that's what I want to do with my career?
Well, I'll say that you're talking about doing that from a sort of an economic perspective.
Yeah, business broadly speaking.
Yeah. Okay. Because there will be tens and tens of thousands of jobs opening up as therapists. And so we'll need an ever increasing number of therapists and hundreds of thousands of them all over the world. From an economic point of view, what has been happening, and this may be why it's been difficult for you, is to find internships, is that enormous amounts of money have been lost and a bunch of companies have gone bankrupt in the psychedelic field. One of the things that you've probably seen this from the work on the Psychedelic Science 2025 is that we're not having many sponsorships from psychedelic pharma companies. They're all feeling like their stocks have gone way down with the rejection by FDA of MDMA. That's also depressed the stocks. But there is still so much going on. So I think one of the things that I'm not sure quite how you could do this wouldn't be really working with a psychedelic company, but one of the key problems is the fact that in America, for insurance, you have much more insurance for physical illness than you do for mental illness. And that's really what's limiting many people's access to once to ketamine, to other things, is that, and when MDMA and psilocybin become approved, that there is this lack of insurance coverage. So you're saying you're doing stuff with Enthea. That's exactly what Enthea is working on. So how do we really get more insurance coverage? The other parts of it is that there's been this what I think is a major mistake and a major misunderstanding is that many of these psychedelic pharma companies are thinking, let's separate the drug from the therapy. The therapy is a complicated thing. FDA doesn't understand therapy. Let's just talk about the drug itself. And from that kind of perspective, they're not thinking about insurance coverage. They're just thinking about getting coverage for the drug. One of the things that's been difficult is, and this is where the economics can come in, is clinics. So most therapists are private practice therapists. They're not part of big chains, but there are sort of Kaiser. There's others um, that do have multiple locations, things like that. So there's a group called Field Trip that was one of the early psychedelic companies that tried to have a network of ketamine clinics. They went broke and lost all sorts of money. So some kind of idea of how do you standardize, you could say, back office practices, like how do you try to get insurance for people, how do you do the screening in the least expensive way, so that there needs to be some sort of more professionalized business. um, and many of the ketamine clinics, um, they're making a lot of money for the drug companies, for Johnson and Johnson, um, but the clinics are sometimes having real financial difficulties. So I'd say um, trying to really understand the model of um, how you successfully run a psychedelic clinic and how you get the insurance coverage to really make it so there's more equitable access. How do you price the services? How do you work? So this idea that I talked about before with peer support. So we know, like with Alcoholics Anonymous and other, that it's people with similar issues of helping each other. So how do we bring in apprentices and peer support into the clinic model, so that you have, let's say, people are volunteering. They've been through something traumatic and they've overcome it, and then they often can be great encouragement to the new people coming in that have those problems. And they might even be willing to volunteer their time as a part of their own healing process. So I think this idea of looking at the economics of the ketamine clinic models, um, some of them are really perverse, I would say, is because when you don't give a friend, this is an example, a friend of mine is taking over working at a ketamine clinic, and she's being assigned patients that other people who had left had. She has one person that's got ketamine 200 times for depression. It's just absurd. And ketamine, fades. When you provide it with therapy, it's more durable. It doesn't fade as much, and you don't need as much ketamine, but you get better outcomes. So when you've got a clinic that's giving somebody ketamine 200 times, and it's hundreds and hundreds of dollars every time that the insurance company pays for the drug, they go back every 2 weeks or so. It's just not it can be a successful financial model for the pharma company and even for the clinic, because you've got these people coming back, but it's not about what's best for patients. And there are so many people with depression and PTSD, 13 million of them in America just with PTSD, that you don't need to get a patient keep coming back forever because they're not really getting the healing that they need. So there needs to be this sort of new model that is about a successful financial model for a clinic that works when you're giving the best care to the patients, and then after a bunch of times, hopefully, then they don't need you anymore, and then you just bring in new people. um, there are healthcare economists. That's another way to sort of use economics, which is how do you figure out the right price of a drug? There is no such right price, but it's a series of trade-offs. What's right for the society? What's right for the pharma company? What's right for the insurance companies? So there's a lot of thought goes into how do you price a drug. So that would be something that I think, Liam, you could work on.
Thank you. And I hope that was useful for you, Liam. And thank you for asking your question. We'll move on to the next one, and it's about integration.
Oh, good.
So integration is probably the hardest part for most people.
Yeah.
And what is your personal practice or routine for integrating insights from psychedelics into your day-to-day life?
Well, for me, I'll start with dreams. So I have found that when you have a psychedelic experience and you've brought certain kind of themes or memories during the experience, that those same kind of emotions or themes can move into your dreams. And it's a very important tool. I think we completely underestimate the power of working with dreams. I mean, when Freudian analysis, it was all about the interpretation of dreams. He has a whole big book on the interpretation of dreams and how you work with them. And a lot of times I'll say that for me, I've got to the point where sometimes I have these feelings, but they're not connected to a story. So the dream is almost just like a certain emotional tone. And so when I wake up, it's just, you don't necessarily need the story, even though that can be helpful, whatever the theme, it's just feeling the feelings. And even if they're difficult, not running away, just sitting with those feelings. So that's the one of the ways to do integration. One of the other ways, this gets back to just I'll say a Jewish tradition on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement. It's the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. It's the when you're written into the book of life or not, supposedly for the rest of the year. But what they say is that the Day of Atonement is for sins between you and God. That if there are sins between you and people, you actually have to make it up to them. So this is sort of the opposite from confession in Catholicism, where you confess to the priest and then it's all okay. You know, you actually have to make it up to the people that you hurt in one way or another. That is the big part of integration, is that you put it into action. You can't just say, oh, I've realized I treated this people poorly and now I'm, acknowledge that. You have to make amends. You have to do something. And that is a real big part of the integration process. The other part of it is to really, and this is just very quick though, but what we try to say to people when they do MDMA is to think about it as a 2-day experience. The first day is to do it, but the second day is to have no appointments, no responsibilities, and just think over what happened. This is for really starting the integration process. And often what happens is that people will have a psychedelic experience and then they'll go about their daily life the next day. And you need to give yourself time to mull over and to think over. The same way with a dream. If you have a dream and you wake up and you go directly into action, you lose the dream. But if you can lie in bed a little bit and think about what was this dream, what was the themes, then more and more of it comes back to you. So that's where I think the day after a psychedelic experience is really critical to start the integration process in a really strong and powerful way, to have absolutely no responsibilities, ideally, and just the therapists come back when we do it in a therapy setting. Now, I'll just say personally, this is different than for many people will say, oh, I do meditation and meditation helps me to integrate. I don't actually meditate. I don't use that, but I do it in a different way. I guess I'm more work oriented. So this idea of I'm not trying to get to the ground of being behind the thoughts and let all the thoughts go. That's what I understand meditation is. You focus on a mantra or you just don't get attached to stuff. So for me, in a way, integration is marijuana is really helpful for integration for me because I get this flow of feelings, this flow. I of course use super strong pot that I can find, but I get this flow and of thinking and feelings. But when there's something that's really interesting, I sort of stick to it. I pick it and instead of letting it go. And that for me is what comes up during that is often things that I've not fully integrated, things that I'm still working on. So I think that for me at least, let me just, sorry, let me just say that's my wife. I'll just tell her later. Okay. Yeah. So I could tell you, hey, I did take out the garbage.
Yeah, I was like, tell her. All the garbage, at
I
least.
did take all the garbage out. Yeah, so marijuana is good for me for integration. But again, it's just that whatever tool people use is to mull it over and think it over and to realize that the sort of fundamental difference between recreational use and sort of therapeutic use is integration. That when you're doing it for recreational use, you're doing it for the experience of the moment, and you want it to be good and you want it to be happy and all that. But with therapy, it's what you bring back and how you change your baseline. And for that, the integration is essential. So a lot of it is um, sort of before even the experience, what are you doing it for? If you're just doing it for the experience, that's more, again, recreational. So the integration work starts in a way in the preparation. What are you doing it for? And are you willing to experience whatever comes up? I think that's the really big part. And then you'll see things. Now, I'll mention there's a really interesting book called The Tell. So Oprah has this, I don't know if you've heard of her Oprah Winfrey and her book group. So the book for last month was called The Tell, and it's about a woman who had an MDMA experience and uncovered sexual abuse from childhood that she had put out of her mind. And so there's sort of two parts of this book. The first part, Amy Griffin is the author, called The Tell. The first part of the book was about the therapy and what happened. And then the second part was about her trying to figure out, did it really happen? Was it symbolic? Was it real? And if it was real, should she press criminal charges against this person? So it became this kind of a detective story almost, where she tried to verify, were these memories just something that didn't actually happen, but that reflected issues that she was working with. So for her, this whole process of trying to figure out, was it real or was it symbolic, was a big part of her integration process. And what she eventually concluded was that she decided that it wasn't proof enough in a court of law, and that she didn't need to go after the perpetrator in that way, which had happened decades before, in order to complete the integration process. That she could do this integration process on her own, and this process of talking to her friends who are in similar classes with the same teacher and all this kind of stuff. So I think this integration process can involve actions in the world, particularly if it's a perpetrator that is in a position to still perpetrate other people, then you might really want to sort of take more action. And that's again this idea that not only do you work through your own things, you do that, and then the other part, I would say, a big part of integration, which gets back to what you said about hurt people hurt people. There's this idea of forgiveness, or at least understanding. So and it's not necessary, and many people don't talk about it, but a lot of people do talk about how during their healing process, they understand and have compassion for the person that hurt them, that they were coming from such a place of pain as well. So that can be an important part of the integration process, because then you sort of, it's not that you say, oh, I'm glad it happened, or that I forgive them, they shouldn't, I don't care that they did that or anything like that. But this understanding of how they were hurt can give you a certain kind of freedom from anger, or from holding holding that as a big thing that already happened. You can move beyond it. So forgiveness can also be a part of integration. And I don't know if I'm explaining it exactly right. It's not you're forgiving them because but you can just get over the anger for them in a way. You can move beyond it, and so that's a big part of integration also.
Yeah. Yeah, like forgiveness. It sounds like you're accepting it, but
Some
Yeah.
kind of empathy
Yeah.
also for that everyone comes from something.
Yeah, yeah, there is that empathy. I think that understanding, yeah, that people are twisted from an early age often, and then they don't know how to respond to other people. And you hear a lot about how people that are abused um, have, confused that with love, and often they end up abusing their own children in different ways. And so that just keeps these cycles going. And when you can understand and forgive, that's a freedom.
Yeah. All right, thank you. And now we're going to move into, so we have 20 minutes or just a little less than 20 minutes. And I think a lot of people are a little bit curious about what's going on in the States.
Ah, yes, yes.
Would you like to give a little, well, the context and what is happening in
Yeah.
regards also to psychedelics? And is it for the better of psychedelics future or
Well,
first?
yeah. Here's the, okay, I'll start with that aspect of it. The current administration is terrible and self-destructive in almost everything that they do. On the other hand, for whatever reasons that I would say have to do with the strategy that we had for all these years of really trying to develop bipartisan support, of work with veterans, that are something that, you know, Republicans are willing to support. So we do have bipartisan support. And we do have an administration that is very sympathetic to psychedelics. So I think that there's real opportunities here. Okay, I'm going to share this. So that's the basic thing, is there needs to be, and there will be, these discussions between the new investors that are investing in Lykos, the pharma company, and the FDA, and there is an openness there. And that's kind of, well, I'll get back to, I had a meeting with a Supreme Court justice, and I had taken money. I don't know if I told this story before. I'd taken $1 million from Rebecca Mercer. So she was, her father and she owned Cambridge Analytica. That was the group that in 2016 helped Trump get elected, and that took all the information from Facebook and shared it with Russians and used it to micro-target people to try to turn certain districts more Republican, because we have this electoral college, which is not real democracy for our presidential elections. That this Rebecca Mercer was very much right wing, and so I've gotten a lot of criticism from taking money. And all her thing was, is here's $1 million, and you just have to limit it to veterans. So I spoke about it with the Supreme Court justice, who I met at a Passover Seder, and we sat next to each other for hours. And I said, what do you think I should have done? He said, the essence of democracy is finding common ground with people with whom you may disagree on everything else. And so there's too little of that in these hyper-partisan ways, so you did the right thing. So I would say because of that, we do have this openness for psychedelics under the new administration. So as far as what's happening in America, here's another, I'm going to share the screen. This is another quote from Jung. The best political, social, and spiritual work we can do is to withdraw the projection of our shadow onto others.
Yeah.
So what he means by that is that this, as I said before, that we are the source, he said before, we are the source of all coming evil. The shadow is the part of ourselves that we disown, that we're not comfortable with, and we project it onto others. So what is going on in America is a massive projection of the darkest, deepest American shadow onto others. So it's anti-immigrants, it's anti-gay people, it's anti-progressive people, it's anti. And so it is the epitome of selfishness and retribution and anger. And it's been empowered by the majority of the American public, or at least the majority of the voters. It's not a mandate. It's not the majority of the American public. It's the majority of the American voters, and it's just a bare majority. But we have the worst of the worst, and people were chosen because they were incompetent to be in the cabinet. People were chosen because they were incompetent and they weren't there out of their merits. So therefore, they only were there because Trump had appointed them and the Senate permitted them to be confirmed. So we're developing this whole culture of dependency on the leader. And we have this massive anti-intellectual aspect of it. It's not about science. So they're going after universities. They're going after the cover story is waste, fraud, and abuse, but it's in order to create opportunities for corruption. So what Trump is trying to do is turn America into Russia, to turn America into a situation where everything is dependent on the leader, and it's not about. It's really not about wise decisions. The whole tariff situation is another opportunity for corruption because there's no rational basis for these tariffs. It's like who will permit a Trump hotel in their country or whatever. So it's a incredible cowardice is what's going on in America. There are starting to be more people stepping up, and the irony for me is that often it's the overreaching. So Americans are, well, I'll just say my daughter, my youngest daughter is 26, lives in Washington. She worked for a group called Interaction that helps refugees and migrants all over the world. They were funded by a federal grant from USAID. The grant was canceled. She lost her job. All the people that she was working with lost her job. The entire field of refugee and migrant and humanitarian assistance is wiped out. And not only that, but she's in Washington, D.C., and so many people are being fired from the federal government that she's got no opportunity to get another job in there in Washington. She's going to have to leave probably to find a job after she was just living with friends, setting up her life. So what we're seeing is massive destruction. It's way worse than Brexit. When we think about what Brexit did to London and to England, their growth, their economics have gone down in many different ways. Their global influence has gone down. What's happening in America is worse because we were sort of the leader of the quote free world and supported democracy. And just today, the article in the New York Times was about how the State Department is eliminating the groups that promote democracy. So I think the way to think about it is that if Trump is not a Russian agent, he's playing one on TV. This is, you could not be more effective at destroying America. And one of the things that's the strength of America have been foreign students coming to study in America. And now foreign students are not want to come to America. We've had brilliant Chinese students coming to help to do all sorts of things. Sergey Brin, who started Google, came from Russia. We are a nation that has been strengthened by immigration, but immigrants have always been kind of the other initially. So there's always been prejudice, but so it's a massive amount of projection of our shadow, and it's a massive amount of the epitome of narcissism and selfishness and cowardice. Whether America can actually recover, one of the things that's hopeful in a way, in a weird kind of a way, is that the Trump administration is going after Social Security. Social Security was created during the Depression when there was massive unemployment, massive suffering. And so there was this way where we will help people in their retirement. We don't have the social safety net that you have in Sweden or in Finland or elsewhere. So the Trump administration is going after Social Security. And that's really what's alienating a lot of people. So they are creating their own enemy. They're so filled with venom and retribution and everything that they're going too far in certain areas. And that is generating a bit of a backlash. There's something else that I learned that relates to what's going on in America, which is Adam Kinzinger was a Republican member of Congress, and he was one of the few that voted to impeach Trump. And he was on the January 6th committee of the House to look at what happened. And he said something that was really wise. He said he's learned that there is something that people are more scared of than death. And he said that's being kicked out of your tribe.
Mm.
There are other people that have looked at when there are civil wars in different, when does a country reach a point of civil war? And there's two big factors, whether it's sort of violent or like this, what we're having so far. One of them is that there's a dominant majority. This was sort of the white Christian majority in America that's losing its dominance for demographic reasons, for other reasons. So you have a group in power that's losing power. And then you have people identified by tribes, not by policies. So we have that now. We have people identified they're part of this tribe. And the cost of admission to the Republican tribe is that you have to say Trump was uh, stolen the 2020 election. He actually won, which there's no evidence he did. You have to believe all the lies that he says. You have to throw your lot in with this tribe. So it's like the big lie is that you surrender your rationality as a way to show that you're part of a tribe. And then stuff can happen terrible and you stick with this tribe. So what's going to be necessary in America is some of the independents that were voting for Trump, or some of the people that low information voters that thought Trump would make the life better, but it's not happening. So there is hope for America. I don't want to end on such a super downer note, but it's terrible what's going on. I'm proud to say that Harvard is sticking up against Trump, trying to go after taking away their money and trying to control the academic freedom. But it's the traditional totalitarian playbook. Trump is a bully. Trump is in favor of bullies. Um, and it's just been shocking how um, enough people supported that. And so that's where I think the damage in America is going to be generational, because you could say Trump got elected in a fluke in a way in 2016, but people knew how bad he was and how authoritarian he was, and he still got election again. So there's a real lack of trust in the American electorate. And in some ways, to weave it back to psychedelics, the whole purpose for my work and for the psychedelic renaissance was to avoid something like this, was to build enough resilience and emotional processing. And so people were not motivated by fears and anxieties and could so easily be triggered to say, oh, your problems are due to the immigrants and let's go after them. Um, it's just terrifying what's going on here. There are people thinking to leave America, but then where do you go? We got to stay here and fight. So it's, they keep saying, as you're growing up, that every generation has to win its own fight for democracy. But I never really believed that. I thought, okay, the structures of America are strong enough. The fight for democracy has been won. Now it's just, but now it's the fundamentals of America are under attack, and the attackers are winning at this moment. But there will be, and there is this counter reaction. And so, again, there's hope. Um, but we really hope that the Europeans support Ukraine, and other things to take up for America. And America is in the grips of self-destruction in a lot of ways. So anyway, I hope that is that similar to how you all see it?
I think so, yeah.
And I think we're like it's getting worse and worse. Like it's
Yes.
kind of escalating. And I
Yeah.
think that is what's surprising a lot of people as well. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no bottom to how low Trump will go, and there's no limit to what a lot of his supporters will support.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think you said it very well. Like losing their tribe is like so painful.
Yeah.
So you do whatever it takes to stay with it.
Yeah, I mean, the sad thing is to say is how many Germans were in favor of Hitler at the end of the war,
Yeah.
after they've seen all the negative consequences and all the people that died.
Yeah.
Some people just stick with that. They can't But that's where psychedelics can come in, or therapy. You can overcome these patterns of thought. You can process all this stuff, but you have to be willing to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Have
there's
to
just a lot of
willing
people
to-
that are not willing.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah, but we'll stay and fight. We'll do what we can. And the thing is, when it gets to going after people's own money, then they start paying attention. So that's where the overreach, it's getting worse and worse. But the Trump administration going after Social Security is, I think, going to be one of the things that is working against them.
Mm. Yeah. All right. Well, time passed so fast.
Wow, it did. It did. I
Now
guess
we-
you probably have a lot of questions you didn't ask.
There's a lot of questions still that we still have. But again, thank you so much for your
Yeah.
knowledge, for sharing a piece of you as well.
Thank you.
And yeah, it's been super enriching. And we're gonna come to Denver for
Oh, good, good. You're willing to come to America. Hooray.
Yes, we will.
Just for psychedelic science.
Okay, terrific.
So excited about that.
Yeah, so
It's going to
maybe
be really exciting. Yeah, we've had over 1,500 applicants for speaking.
Yeah.
We only have like 400 talks, and we are going to stream some of it and make it all available online for everybody to see for free afterwards. So, great. I'm so glad we'll be able to talk in person.
Yeah.
yes. All right.
Terrific.
So enjoy your meeting and thank you for your time.
Yes,
Thank you, Rick.
my pleasure.
Thank you so much from home. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you all for joining. And we're gonna keep in touch. Yeah.
Okay, terrific. Okay, bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye
See you soon.
bye.
Bye.